Today we will be studying unit rates and proportional reasoning. This will be section 4.2 in your textbook. By the time we finish the lesson, we should be able to define what a unit rate is and also be able to compute a unit rate. We can do this by multiplying and dividing a unit rate by the same factor. In the end, you'll be able to identify the constant of proportionality, which is really just unit rate. Please get out your notebook to take some notes. Rate. A rate is a ratio, and we know that a ratio compares two quantities, but a rate compares two quantities with different units. For example, 120 miles per 2 hours. Those are different units, miles and hours. A unit rate is the rate for just one unit. So an example of this is driving 60 miles in 1 hour. Again, the unit rate is 1. Now let's take some notes on how we find unit rate. To find a unit rate, you have to divide the first quantity by the second quantity. All this means is taking the numerator and dividing it by the denominator. An example of this is 1,500 calories per 5 servings. Remember, the fraction bar can be read as per, 1,500 calories per 5 servings. To find out the unit rate, we can just divide both the numerator and the denominator by the denominator, which is 5, and we will end up with 300 calories per 1 serving. Now let's watch a video to help us explain these more.
What are rates and unit rates? First, let's look at rates. Let's check out the definition for rates. A rate is a ratio of different units. In other words, a rate is a ratio of a quantity per another quantity, and those two quantities have different units. So let's look at some examples of rates. Let's say we have 60 miles in 3 hours, and we want to write that as a rate. Well, we have 60 miles per 3 hours. So let's say we got 60 miles per 3 hours. Here we have this relationship set up as a rate. We have two quantities being put as a ratio, one quantity divided by the other quantity, and those two quantities have different units, miles and hours. So think of this like driving a car. You can drive a car 60 miles per 3 hours. Now let's look at another example. Let's say we have 40 words per 2 minutes. This you can think of like typing speed. You can type 40 words per 2 minutes. Here again, we have a ratio of two quantities, 40 and 2. And each of those quantities has different units, words and minutes. So remember, a rate is simply a ratio of quantities that have two different units. Now that we know a little bit more about rates, let's check out unit rates. A unit rate is a rate that has a denominator of 1. So if you have a rate just like one of these, except the denominator, the bottom number, is 1, then you have what's called a unit rate. Let's look at a couple examples of unit rates. Let's see. Let's compare 20 miles and 1 hour. So we'd write it like this. We'd have 20 miles per 1 hour. This looks just like the rates we were working with before, except here our denominator has a 1 in it. Here again, we have two quantities as a ratio, and they have two different units, miles and hours. So here we have 20 miles per 1 hour. Now we can also rewrite this to look like this. 20 over 1 can be rewritten as 20. Then we look at our units. We have miles per hour. So we can write those as a fraction that looks like this. Miles per hour, with a fraction line in the middle. Now you always want to make sure to keep these units separated correctly. So miles needs to be in the numerator. So we have miles per hour. So now we have 20 miles per 1 hour is the same thing as 20 miles per hour, which is probably how you're used to seeing it. A car going, say, 20 miles per hour. Now let's look at one more example of unit rate. Let's say we have 20 words per 1 minute. So it would look like this. Again, it looks like a normal rate, except here, in the denominator, our quantity is 1. So that means we have a unit rate. We have 20 words per 1 minute. Now we can also rewrite this. 20 over 1 is the same as 20. Words over minutes means that we have words per minute. So that would be something like saying you could type 20 words per minute. So now we know a little bit more about rates and unit rates.
Now let's practice. Please turn to page 132 and do quick check number 1. Find the unit rate for 210 heartbeats in 3 minutes. To find the heartbeat in 1 minute, you have to divide both the numerator and the denominator by 3, and you should get 70 heartbeats in 1 minute, or 70 heartbeats per minute. Now, how do we find unit rate using a fraction? Well, we do it the same way, but there's a couple more steps involved. You're going to have to write down these steps as we go. An example is, Cindy walks 6/10 of a mile in a quarter of an hour. What is her speed in miles per hour, or what is her unit rate? The first thing you do is write the ratio as a division problem. So 6/10 divided by 1/4. Then the next step is to follow the rules of integer division. And if you remember, we learned the acronym KCF, keep, change, flip. So we keep the fraction 6/10 the same, we change the division to multiplication, and we flip the fraction to 4 over 1. And the third step is just to solve our multiplication problem now. So 6 times 4 is 24, and 10 times 1 is 1. So we now have 24 tenths, which, if we put it in proper form, is 2 2/5 miles per hour. Your turn. Let's do quick check on page 133, number 2. Find the unit rate for 3/10 of a mile in 3/4 of an hour. Okay, the first thing we do is write it as a division problem. 3/10 divided by 3/4. We then do our keep, change, flip to make it a multiplication problem. 3/10 times 4 over 3. When we do that, we get 12 divided by 30, or 2/5 miles per hour. The question you might be asking now is, why do we have to learn this? What does this have to do with our life? Well, one popular use of unit rate is for comparing. For example, when you want to find out which car drives the fastest, or finding the best deal when you're shopping. Let's watch this Braining Camp to learn a little bit more about comparing unit rates.
A fruit stand sells 12 apples for $3 and 10 pears for $2.60. To know whether each apple costs less than each pear, it helps to understand rates. A rate is a ratio that compares two quantities measured in different units. Recall that a ratio is a comparison of two numbers or quantities. The distance traveled by the van to the distance traveled by the car is a ratio. The distance traveled by the car to the time traveled by the car is also a ratio. The ratio comparing distance to time is a special kind of ratio called a rate, because it compares quantities measured in different units. See if you can identify whether each ratio is also a rate. Drag the tiles to the correct location. Imagine a car that travels 150 miles in 3 hours. We say that the car moves at a rate of 150 miles per 3 hours. If the car travels 150 miles in 3 hours, use the controls to see how far the car travels in 1 hour. The rate 150 miles per 3 hours is equivalent to the rate 50 miles per 1 hour. A rate where the second quantity is 1 is called a unit rate. Use the steppers to see that the unit rate represents the amount the first quantity changes for every 1 unit change in the second quantity. Also notice that you can find the unit rate from any rate by dividing both quantities by the second value. You can use what you have learned about unit rates to find how far a truck travels in 5 hours if it travels 120 miles in 3 hours. Start by finding the unit rate. The unit rate is found by dividing the first quantity, 120, by the second quantity, 3. The unit rate is 40 miles per hour. Next, use the unit rate to find the number of miles driven in 5 hours. Since the unit rate shows the number of miles driven in 1 hour, just multiply both quantities in the unit rate by 5. The truck can travel 200 miles in 5 hours. Unit rates are also useful for comparing rates. Consider a truck that drives 150 miles in 3 hours and a car that drives 120 miles in 2 hours. Find the unit rate for each vehicle by dividing the number of miles by the number of hours. The unit rates show that the car is faster. Every hour the car travels 60 miles and the truck travels just 50 miles. Recall that the graph of equivalent ratios is a straight line that goes through the origin. The unit rate is the point on the graph corresponding to 1 unit of the second quantity. Now back to our problem of finding whether each apple costs less than each pear. Unit rates will give the price for each apple and each pear. The first number will be dollars and the second number will be apples or pears. Unit rates are found by dividing the first quantity by the second quantity. By comparing unit rates, you can see that each apple costs 1 cent less than each pear.
Now let's try a problem on page 133. 2 sizes of shampoo bottles are shown. Which size is the better buy? Round your answer to the nearest cent. $3.99 for 13.5 ounces or $6.19 for 16 ounces. Pause the video and figure out the problem. Okay, you should have gotten your answer. You should see that the 13.5 ounce bottle is actually a better deal. It's only 30 cents per ounce, where the 16 ounce bottle is 39 cents an ounce. Okay, let's do quick check on page 133. Number 3. Which bottle of apple juice is the better buy? 48 ounces for $3.05 or 64